Hey everybody, welcome to our super hot room. Yeah, thanks for joining us and just sweating collectively together. It's been great. I'm Sarah Werelberg. I'm the director of Stanford Web Services here at the university.
Hi, my name is Allison Hill and I'm a web project manager at Stanford Web Services.
And this is a small enough group. I would love it if you guys wouldn't mind humor me and go around the room and say who you are and where you're from.
Okay, Mark Sonnet, and I used to work for 2020, but then a year ago I started my own company based on the experience dealing with supply, charging an enormous money per seat. So I said, okay, I'll try to come up with open source. I'm not going to charge anything, but try to see what happens. So,
great. So we have an entrepreneur among us. That's great. How about you? Where are you from?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm working for daunting, which is the Japanese mobile operator. I'm a cloud architect.
Great.
And we are using the Drupal.
Welcome to Stanford. You're Rob.
I'm Rob Black. I'm a entrepreneur and working on point-of-sale startups. But at the same time, I'm also doing some consulting for Stanford, particularly Stanford Application Consulting.
Perfect.
For their Drupal site.
I'm Steve Bean. I'm from the Office of Undergraduate Admission Function.
Michael, I'm from the University of San Francisco.
Welcome. And you, sir?
I am David Long. I am Stanford Web Services here at Stanford.
Ma'am.
Stanford Web Services here at Stanford.
I'm Tori Lewis. I work with Fibonacci Web Studio. We're a small web development shop.
I'm Cassie Sharp. I'm a senior web developer for the Stanford School of Earth Energy and Environmental Sciences.
I'm Sean Armand. I'm with UC Davis.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everybody. It's nice to know the mix of higher education folks and entrepreneurs that are in the room. We were theorizing that we would have a bunch of vendors who just kind of want Stanford to hire them, pack the room. Super awesome that that is not the case. So our talk just got more relevant. Let's share our secrets. All right. Are you gonna work it for us? I forgot to grab the clicker.
That's okay.
All right, so we're here to share the good, the bad, and the ugly about our experience hiring a lot of vendors. Allison and I have been around the block a couple of times with lots of different projects. We've hired for our own in-house agency or vendors that we've hired to do large projects. And we've earned our experience stripes well, herding the cats, which is my favorite.
These cats, these specific cats.
So yeah, we've definitely been there. For me personally, a fairly recent project with Cassie and her team, as a matter of fact, was we did a vendor search. We wrote an RFP together. We did a vendor search to bring in an expert vendor to help us through a large user experience discovery and design phase for the redesign of Stanford Earth. And I think that experience, it had a great outcome. It was a real learning lesson through the course of the project, though. So in writing this, sort of reflecting back on the experience and writing the RFP and trying to attract the kind of vendor that we wanted to work with.
Resulting site was nominated for a Webby.
Resulting site built by our team. Not by said vendor.
But they did a great design.
Yeah.
That's true. That is true.
All right. Should we keep on going?
Yeah.
All right.
So these are a collection of tips, things we've learned along the way. Since I can't see the notes, I have no idea who's talking first. Is it me or you?
I'm talking first.
Woohoo!
Yes, awesome. When starting an RFP, I think it could be a really daunting sort of document to put together because you're like, oh, I'm going to write my life's work here for the next year, or maybe it's a smaller chunk of work, and you're like, where do I start? And so,
What's an RFP?
What is an RFP? An RFP stands for a request for proposal, which is a document to solicit bids from external agencies, usually in our case, for work. And what we're trying to do is get basically quotes for what that work's going to cost and what that vendor will be doing to hopefully solve a problem that we've got. So one thing that we start out with is to spend time understanding the business problem and that your project aims to solve, So what is it that you want to do with that? That's what your RFP should answer. Your vendors are trying to figure out who you are and what you're trying to do. And sometimes I actually like to think about it in terms of what are the consequences of not doing the project. And so one of the RFPs that I've run is for my previous department, in which we were trying to basically attract enough applicants to fill 5,000 spots for summer programs at Stanford. And so if we didn't fill those spots, what would be the consequence of that? And so that's trying to figure out, like, what is the overarching sort of idea there. The next part is something that I didn't realize I could do, is to create an RFP for discrete phases of a project. And so originally when I was writing RFPs, I thought I had to write an RFP for the whole shebang. And that's not necessarily the case. And so if you don't know what your business problem is, or you don't know what you're going to build, I would highly suggest separating out the RFP. So you could do an RFP for discovery, you could do an RFP for design, you could do an RFP for development. But there are definitely pluses and minuses to that as well. So
yeah, I think it's fair to say that when you split the RFP into distinct phases, what it allows you to do is to reduce the work down to its smallest possible knowable size, and then go get an expert vendor that is very skilled in that particular phase, because there are some agencies that are really good in user experience discovery, but maybe their visual design is not quite the style that you might want to go for this project, or they're great with visual design, but they're not a Drupal shop, and maybe you happen to work in a place where Drupal is the preferred CMS, or where WordPress is the preferred, and the agency doesn't specialize in that. So splitting your phase allows you to bring in vendors that are a more appropriate fit for what you need done. Also breaks it into smaller costs. Smaller costs, easier to control.
and maybe you can split it across fiscal years.
Maybe you can split it across fiscal years. Yeah. Problem. Well, you need two universities. We have this BS methodology of trying to pay down to zero by the end of the year instead of I like making revenue like that.
All right, and so one thing to plan for is that if you have more stakeholders, it means that you're gonna have more rounds of review, which at the end just costs more money. And so really thinking about who is going to be on your team from your department side of the business. So when I first started doing RFPs, I was like, I have to be totally inclusive with everyone. And what I didn't realize is that now, instead of writing an RFP that maybe might take a couple weeks, it took a couple of months. And then having to have multiple people then be on the deciding part of which vendor we're going to take, we were like, oh yeah, we can totally do that in 2 weeks. And it was like totally not the case, because trying to coordinate all of those schedules meant that it was more time on our part. And then also that means there's more waiting time to do it. So really think about who your stakeholders are and identify those who can make decisions and who need to be in the room, but also identify those who just need to be consulted or informed that something is going on.
All right, you're ready to write. You're super excited. I know the business problem I'm trying to solve. And you know what? A business problem is not my director thinks that our website is ugly. That is not a business problem. That is a problem. But the business problem is the ugly website is not attracting the 5,000 students that need to fill butts and chairs for summer session. So you figure that out, you're ready to write. So really important, I think, in attracting a good vendor is your RFP should describe what your goal is, your goal for solving that problem, not the solution for how you solve the problem. So you don't want your RFP to say, we require a new website. It needs to have a carousel on the front, and it needs to be able to do this and that. And because you're going to find vendors who will absolutely deliver what you're looking for, but it might not actually solve the problem. Because if you could solve the problem, you wouldn't be hiring a vendor. You're looking for an expert to support you and deliver a set of skills, a set of designs, programming, documentation that you can't create on your own. You need their expertise. So give them the room to be creative and to deliver a solution that is not something that you might have come up with on your own. So spend that RFP time describing the goal in terms that they can understand, in terms that they will empathize with, want to solve with you, not for you, with you. In the discovery phase, You want to make sure you include time for user research. You might think that you know what your audience is and what they need, and in fact, you may know that to a certain degree, but doing user research allows confirmation of what you think you know, or it might really challenge what you know about that audience. And you can find some great vendors out there that are really good at particular type of research that will get at what each type of audience you're serving may need out of the new site that you're building, or the new application you're building. Similarly, when you move to the design stage, make sure that that RFP is requesting that the vendor be prepared to do user testing. You can user test visual designs. You can do A/B testing. You can put a design online and have them follow the flow, make sure they don't get lost in the architecture. And if time isn't built in your RFP, you may find that the designer does a great set of designs and use every single hour that is allowed in that budget on that beautiful set of designs, and then there's no time to prove that it's actually going to attract the audience. And then when you build it, it might go, which is no good. Same for development phase. As they're pushing out the prototype site, the dev site, make sure that there's time allowed in the budget for user testing of that, which means in the RFP, you need to point out that that is something that you want to spend time on. You should be upfront with your budget. So my team is an in-house agency at Stanford. We're part of Stanford, but we're also kind of a vendor because we charge for our services, which I deeply dislike, but if I didn't charge for our services, I would have like 3 people and a dog working on our team. So it's nice that in a way we have to charge for our services. But even though we're part of Stanford, clients will be like, no, I can't tell you my budget. They'll just play it really close to the vest. I'm like, it's just money. It just, tell us what you have, because I don't want to pitch a Cadillac when your budget is a Kia. So let's like be clear. And as the person not writing the RFP, be clear about that budget, account for tax, don't forget there's that thing that we pay the government, and set aside a contingency fund. The vendor that you select, even if they are absolutely excellent at watching the burn down rate, knowing how much time they've spent and how much time is left, they're going to use every time. No vendor's going to leave money on the table. So have a little bit of a contingency fund, because there may be some change that you want to make midstream, some new request that you have, which is completely legit, and they should have a process for handling. But you don't want to blow all of your budget and then have to go back to your budget officer and say, it turns out this thing that I want to build is going to be more costly, because how hard is it to find money laying around at Stanford, Steve? It's pretty damn hard. Yeah, exactly. And this is coming from the admissions office, which, not broke, the admissions office.
Do you do questions now, Eliza?
Oh, you can go right ahead.
Go for it. How much do you usually, what percentage do you usually budget for contingency?
10%, 5%?
I usually do 20%.
Yeah. Not smart? Smart. Go with her answer. Yeah. Good question. This is the Xiaqian slide. For those of you who don't know Xiaqian, our friend from the Stanford Online Accessibility Program, she's in the back of the room. Accessibility compliance matters throughout all phases of your project, but it even matters when you're writing your RFP. You need to include language in there about what Stanford expects from their vendors out in terms of accessibility of whatever phase they're in, the design phase or the development phase. There's specific language that she helpfully put on the SOAP website, as well as is on the contract site, that has to go in the RFP and the contract that you're issuing on behalf of the university. And vendors have to prove in the bidding stage that they know what this means and that they're prepared to comply with our rules. At the point of development and launching a site, they should also be able to prove the steps that they took in order to ensure that they're compliant with our policy. Go around and ask for feedback from your colleagues who maybe have worked with those vendors in the past. This is a no-brainer, but it is very important. We don't maintain any kind of a past vendor database at Stanford where you can sort of just go in and see who has worked with that in the past. So that's where events like this become really useful. You make some friends in the web community and get on Slack and say, hey, who's hired this firm out of Utah? And I'll be like, oh. I would just pick it on Utah. There's nothing against Utah.
Congrats.
How are you?
You've selected a vendor. So you can negotiate pricing That's something that I've also learned along the way too. And also with that negotiating pricing, looking at how they're spending the budget. So you know, like if there's an expense in there that says like travel, well, ask questions like, what does that mean? Is that something that can be lessened? Is that something that could maybe change if you ask for more in-person visits if your agency is remote? Sometimes there are agencies who will offer nonprofit discounts, or sometimes you can have different resourcing, right? You may not need to have the most senior level person be working on your project, and if you're okay with that, that might be able to change the pricing there. So yeah. So confirm the specific vendor staff who will lead your project. So sometimes what happens is that you fall in love with the team that is presenting to you, and then you find out that that team is not actually working with you, and then you're sad because you feel like you've created a relationship with that person, or the stakeholders have created a relationship and they're like, I really wanted to work with that person on that team. And then you find out later the team that actually shows up to your discovery workshop isn't there. And so what you can do is try to ask for a commitment as much as you can to do that they actually work with you so that you can meet the team. And oftentimes what I've asked in presentations is to actually meet some of the people that will be there so that we can sort of see if they might be a good fit. Assign a Stanford project manager to work closely with the vendor project manager. So we offer a really cool service at Web Services.
Very subtle.
Very subtle. In which you can have an SWS project manager like me or Rachel help consult with your project. We know that a lot of times that what you do is not necessarily web development or making websites, and we can help you through that process since we've done it multiple times with all those stripes that we've earned, basically. And we can help with writing RFP. We can follow along with the project as well, providing guidance for both the vendor and yourself as well. If there's any questions or you maybe don't want to ask the vendor because you might feel a little like embarrassed or something like that, we're here for that. So, yeah. Last is your product owner should be deeply involved in all aspects of the project, and I really think this is just for the whole shebang, basically. Generally speaking, your product owner holds the vision for the project, and if they're not deeply involved, then you may make decisions, or your team may make decisions, and they may come back and be like, what did you do? And suddenly that costs money and time. And so, I highly suggest that your product owner is in all the meetings. They're editing that RFP, they're writing that RFP, they're part of that decision-making process so that there aren't any surprises along the way. So, oh, and there we have some resources for you. So we have an RFP template that we do.
While she's pulling up the templates, I can just sort of give some context to where the resources came from. So we write so many project charters and we outsource so many projects to vendors that we got pretty good at writing an RFP, and we just started sharing that Google document across Stanford. And then we thought, well, we should really just centrally host this somewhere so that people can find it. So the process we use is we use Google Docs to co-create the request for proposal with our clients. And it's kind of no-brainer now that we're all on Google Docs, but even as recently as 2 years ago, there were a lot of units at Stanford that weren't on Google Drive yet. So it was a bit of an aha moment that you could co-author a document like this and track changes. And then you can set up a shared drive for your project team to put all of the vendor search documents in, and then set up folders within that where your selected vendors that you're sending the proposal to can drop their proposals. So you end up using Drive for the entire process, which is super helpful whenever you're working maybe across geographic boundaries like we are often at Stanford. So there's that one. After we issue the RFP, we give them a reasonable amount of time to turn in the proposals, and then we will distribute the reviewing of the proposals and schedule some interviews, some on-campus interviews with the vendors. And that's when the vendor interviewing team here at Stanford, we give them a vendor scorecard where they can on their own sort of rate the proposal itself, the presentation itself, based on success metrics or success criteria that we've laid out in advance. So this is just a sample. Which phase do you have here? I think it's discovery.
This is a discovery phase scorecard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we want their proposal to demonstrate that they understand our project and a clear vision, and that's most important. So we weighted at 50. We want them to demonstrate visual design expertise for that type of project, UX expertise. So with your team or your client, you're going to define those criteria that you're looking for in advance and in order of importance, and then write your own scorecard. So this is just kind of an example.
Yeah. And the points here really don't matter. What really matters is what's being weighted heavier than something else.
What's more important
Yeah.
to you?
So we have a vendor scorecard for the proposal itself, and we try to use that proposal as a way to figure out who we would like to bring in for a presentation. And so it becomes a really nice way for everyone on your team to feel heard too as well through the scorecard. Then this is another example of a presentation scorecard there.
I think when we did the Stanford Earth search, we had it. How many, David, did we send to? We sent it out to 4 or 5 vendors, but we selected 3, I think, to come do on-campus presentations. So we had to do a first round cut, and we used a vendor scorecard to collect feedback and see who goes to the top.
Yeah, and I also thinking about that, we suggest probably to send at least 5 or 6 proposals out, because you can expect basically like about a 50% response rate. And so for here, at least at Stanford, you need at least 3 quotes to fill the procurement process. And so if you don't get at least 3, then you're going to have to try to solicit more.
Yeah, that's if the project cost for that phase is over $25K, which mostly if you're going out to a vendor for a project, it's going to be big enough where it'll often exceed that type of amount.
Well, plus I'd say it's good just to get good enough variance in thinking and approach to what your problem space is, because you need that variance to be able to understand, is this vendor going to be the right vendor? If you hear everyone saying the exact same thing, it's that narrow of a response, then they're either not thinking about it creatively, or you don't even need a vendor because it's that easy of a problem to fix, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's nice to make sure that you're getting a good variation of response and thoughtfulness about your problem.
Yeah, really agree with that. What's the next one that we have in terms of a tool?
Let's see. We have procurement process and accessibility. Let's see.
Yeah, so the procurement process, everybody just shudder for a minute. This website, which predates me at the university, it has a long life cycle, this website, because it's such a utility that it gets such high use, and it's sort of like, don't touch it. This tells you how to get a contract done at Stanford, and it tells you the amount of time that it takes to get a contract done. So in our experience, the groups on campus that are issuing RFPs, they often haven't done it before, and they often don't realize that the procurement process with the competitive bids and the reviewing of the contracts and then signing the dotted line, getting them established as a vendor, you receive a check from the university. If they've never worked for the university before, it takes a long time. If they've worked for the university before, it takes marginally less time. So this is really important to read through if you are working at this particular university. And also note that this website is under redesign right now, so look for a brand new version, approximately 12 months from now. Maybe.
Maybe.
It's such a project, I don't envy them at all. In that contract, there's some standards. We talked about the accessibility language. This is where you can find information about that. It's right here under the guidelines and the template that you should use. Incredibly useful, a step that I think a lot of folks skip when they're trying to put together RFPs. And I believe that is it for the tools that we put together.
Ah, okay.
Any questions or any war stories anybody wants to share? Sean?
Not war stories. this RFP that you have seems to be mostly around hiring, say, an agency or a contractor or a service provider. Do you have a similar process, or do you ever go and buy like products or services, or like, a web service or something like that, Harvest or something like that? Right? Is this a similar process that you would go through that, or is that a totally different procurement process?
It's a little bit different, actually. So Stanford has two different processes for if you are contracting for a service versus a good.
Right.
And actually, something like Harvest is considered more of a good.
Yeah.
Because it's.
I was trying to find the right word for it. It's sort of a product, but it's not something you hold in your hand.
Yeah, but it's also not something that they are custom creating
For
for
you.
Stanford. And so the latter, the services one, they are a little bit tougher on because there are standards that have to be met in what gets created. There's contract language on the fact that Stanford then owns the outcome of the service contract. So it's all about transfer of intellectual property and ownership. Whereas the good is more like you bought a thing, you paid once for the thing, and then when you're done with the thing, you don't own it anymore.
Right.
You know?
But the good is also might come with terms and conditions or security requirements that you would need to do assessments on or something.
It does over a certain level of spend.
Okay.
So like our contract with a hosting provider, for example, was big enough that it had to go through a whole data risk assessment. It had to go through a whole security compliance assessment and much heavier contract language in terms and conditions. But when I go out and I pay for a small little software as a service like Harvest or Jira, nope. Throw down, I know, but it's small cost enough that just throw down a credit card and we just pay it and under the radar.
Yeah, we have absolutely everything has to go through in terms of conditions.
Really?
Really crazy.
I can kind of get it even with Jira. I mean, if you think about how heavily invested, data that's in there, how heavily invested our team is. So, God, now you make me nervous.
Sorry. I won't tell your contracts, but
I've also run RFPs for other services, so like photography, printing, mailing. So if you know that you're going to be doing, like, in our case, we were going to be doing probably a couple hundred hours worth of photography in the summer, then we knew that we could negotiate a lower rate, essentially. So what happened essentially is that photographer that we ended up choosing, her rate was, I think, like $300 an hour, but because she knew she was going to get over $30,000 work that summer, her rate became $150 an hour.
Wow. So
there is some cost saving that you can do with running an RFP. Same with printing too as well. We knew that we were going to do around $100,000 of printing and mailing for that year. And so what we were able to do was look at competitors, basically 3 competitors in the area, and actually go to them and be like, well, this person said that they could do this. And what we were able to do is year over year, I think the first RFP that we run, we saved about 15% from the last year, and then another like 5 or 10% the following year. So, yeah.
Chechen, did you have a question?
Do you have any bad experience to share, and how would you protect yourself?
In the course of writing and issuing an RFP or working with a vendor on a project?
Working with the vendor, is there something in the RFP that you could have done to mitigate that?
So many bad experiences to share.
So many good experiences too.
I would give Tom equally as many good experiences to share. I would say though that it's, I've never once thought, well, damn, if I just put that in the RFP, this whole project would have gone smoother. It's never about what you put in the RFP. If anything, I wish in retrospect, I put less and less information in the RFP or fewer words, because I feel that in the past we've been too prescriptive to the vendor of what the solution should be and not given them appropriate room for being creative. But I do think that at the bidding stage, when they put in a proposal and they describe the solution that you're going to buy into, that there has to be real clarity around exactly what the deliverables are, exactly what each deliverable is going to cost, how much effort is going to go into each deliverable, what Stanford's participation is, where we're going to be. The project timeline has to be built out and super clear. And then they got to hold to that. So the vendor's ability to project manage clearly is critical in the success of the resulting project. Because what happens a lot of time is we get wowed by this 26-page PowerPoint deck and this amazing presentation that some dynamic CEO of some agency does for us, or creative directors usually. And then we don't ever get really clear on exactly what they're delivering. And we're like marching along in the project, and then we get 80% of the way through the budget, but we think that we don't have what we expected to have. And the vendor goes, well, yeah, we do. This is what we're creating together. And if it's not written down really clearly in that proposal or in the contract, you can't really hold them to your expectations. So I would say it's very important up front. It's not really in the RFP, it's in their proposal and your expectations of what you should see in there before you sign a contract. That is very important. You can't hold vendors accountable to the deliverables and to the quality and to, knowing to ask about the budget burn down if they're not showing you on a weekly basis how many hours they've spent, how much money you've got left. You have to have somebody watching that stuff, because that's what will go awry, and then you don't find out until later, and then you don't have any money left in the budget to finish it out. So, yeah, other nightmare projects. I have heard of units that sign 6-figure project proposals for a single website, and to me, it's near and dear to my heart that the university's funding should be going into research, teaching, and learning mission, and healthcare. God, let's not forget the hospital that is our university healthcare mission. And I just feel like sometimes with those mega projects, when they were figuring out the business problem that they needed to solve, there needed to be a checkpoint where they double check to make sure that's actually the amount of money that thing should cost. Because sometimes I think they get wowed by, they've got the money, the vendor gave a great presentation, but it shouldn't cost that much. But their building maybe isn't rocket science. Definitely not curing the cancer. Yeah, that's what I'd say. Soapbox off. I'll get back on it if anybody wants to. Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions?
So how long do you prefer to get the to keep the contract? Every quarter or half a year, 1 year? It's depending on the project, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But you said like checkpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys cannot get some outcome from the vendor, so what's your thoughts?
So is the question, how long is a typical contract, yes, and when are the checkpoints, and when do you fire the vendor if you're not getting the expected outcome? Yeah, those are all good questions. I think there probably isn't such a thing as a typical contract length. It completely depends on the phase, the deliverables you're going for. I would never establish a contract that's longer than a year though, because I think if you're working on a single project mission for a year, you've lost sight of what it was your original mission was. So probably cut that thing up into smaller deliverables or smaller phases so that you can pull the ripcord on the project if you need to, and it's not such a big deal. I genuinely think that time burn downs, when it's a vendor doing work for Stanford, we should get a time burn down on a weekly basis. Because if it's an active project, there's hours every week, there's money being spent every week by Stanford. At a minimum, bi-weekly, minimum, monthly, Stanford pays monthly. So, you gotta make sure that if that check is going out, that Stanford knows that that time is spent accurately and it's an accurate invoice. The checking of the invoices is also something that your on-site PM should do. And then when it's time to fire the vendor, I would say if you are working with the vendor and they are missing deliverables early in the relationship, then you should have some language in that contract that says you get to pull the ripcord if you need to. And that's something our contracts team is actually pretty good at, is making sure that if expectations are not met, that you as the project owner gets to say, nope, wow.
I wouldn't be shy about saying weekly or bi-weekly as far as burn downs, because your vendor needs to be paying attention to what they're doing as well. I mean, we do internally. Mm-hmm. If they're doing a good job billing, if they're doing a good job with their work, they're paying attention to how much how much time they're putting in on a weekly basis, probably a daily basis. So I would not be shy because it's already a trailing indicator, and by the time you get it in your hands, it's going to be a week old, and then you need to be able to manage to an outcome as early as you can.
We have a vendor partner who's very good at this right now. They send an end of week email and they say, this is how far into the project we are, this is how much budget we've spent. So you want those two numbers to be pretty close, right? We have had a nightmare project in the past, that might be overstating a bit, a project that could have gone better in the past where I realized one day that I wasn't getting burnt down reports. I thought, well, that's weird. You know, why am I not getting burnt down? So I asked for one. And we were about 20% of the way through the project and 80% of the way through the budget because they were not watching it carefully. And I was able to step in front and defend our client and say, that is unacceptable. In your proposal, you said we would get budget burn downs on a weekly basis, and we didn't for this many weeks. So guess what you're not billing us for? And they didn't. They wrote that off. It was a massive loss on their part, but it was their mistake. And because we had clear deliverables and expectations in the contract, we were able to defend and save Stanford the fund. We ended up being.
Do you guys have a list of like pre-approved vendors, or it's just like if it's in the system, then it's easier, and if it's not, it's harder?
There's vendors in the system that just simply means that they have all the information they need in their system to get a check. It does not mean that they are pre-approved. It just means they're in the system. And it is faster to establish contracts with them, and it takes an additional week or two for the ones that aren't in there yet. But we don't keep a pre-approved list of vendors list.
That's what we did, and I'm not sure I like this process. I'll just tell you about it. We did an RFP, put it out to not nearly enough vendors, and then it was a generic RFP. It was for the next 2 years, this is the RFP to be on our approved list.
Oh, right, the approved vendors for
Approved.
Well,
for UCDAs.
Okay.
And so I went through all those, and we found people that were good, people that were not, right? But then it seems like there's a lot of other good agencies that are out there that are just not on the list now, and I meet them and they're like, well, how can I get on this? I'm like, I don't know, next time they do it, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, we don't keep a list like that. We want there to be a competitive bid process at Stanford. That being said, if you get into Stanford and you end up doing a good job with a client, word of mouth is strong here. And so sometimes we kind of have to force in new vendors and say, just look at some other agencies to make sure that the university is getting the best possible outcome, the best possible pricing. But it's not.
Plus, I think all the different vendors have their, as Allison was saying earlier, some of them have different strengths. So that one great outcome that you have with one vendor might not be a good fit for another project that's just quite different from their core skill set. So, that's not always the case, but it is the case sometimes. So it's always good to continue to get multiple bids from a nice vendors.
And sometimes some agencies run really hot and they run really cold, dependent on who's staffing it at that time. So it's not, if there was like a list, I couldn't be certain that last year they were really awesome and this year they're still awesome. So it changes.
Agreed. Yeah, it's more about the individuals running the project than it is the company brand itself, right?
what's your dollar minimum before you go out to RFP?
I don't know that I have it. Do we? I mean, 25K and up, it means it has to be a competitive bid. But I think if it's any kind of a service, it has to have I think it has to have some kind of a document that states what your requirements and expectations are.
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional RFP. Yeah. And there's a school of thought that says RFPs are yes and and are not the best way to go, but we found it to be effective if you run a good one. Yeah. So Jen.
Do you usually go with project-based or time and material?
Oh, time and material. I mean, as an agency ourselves, project-based, somebody's losing in that scenario. It's either the client or it's the agency, because you can't predict exactly on the nose exactly how many hours that thing is going to take. So I want an agency partner that I want a good relationship to take a loss if they don't have to, and I don't want Stanford to overpay for the work. So yeah, time and material. But I hate paying for travel. I'll do it. But you know, it drives me crazy that the hour they spent watching Netflix on their phone on the Caltrain coming down from the city, they got paid the same development hourly rate that when they were coding something on their site. Like, what? That's yeah. Not fair. But I get it. Any other questions or moments of empathy we can all share here together in the super hot room?
It's really warm.
That's because you're in the heater. The projector is blowing out all the heat and light bulb right on YouTube.
Awesome. Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming and appreciating our glow here as we spend our time.
To reach us.
We put our heads in circles.